she said, "not on the couch." My heart raced as I whispered, "Then show me a better place." The late afternoon sunlight spilled lazily through the living room windows, painting golden stripes across the carpet. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, catching the light like tiny sparks, and I found myself mesmerized not by the room, but by her. My friend's mom, mid-40s, graceful in a way that felt effortless, with a quiet confidence that could fill a room without her even trying. She moved through the space like she owned it, not with arrogance, but with a calm assurance that drew my gaze every time she passed. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, the rhythmic sound of water hitting ceramic mingling with the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her hair caught the sun, a rich chestnut with strands of gold, and every now and then, a lock fell loose, brushing against her cheek as she tucked it back behind her ear. I couldn't help but notice the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes, evidence of a life well lived, laughter shared, tears endured. It was intimidating, yet strangely inviting, a beauty shaped by experience, not youth alone. I lingered near the doorway, pretending to check my phone, but really just watching her. I was careful, deliberate, knowing that this was a delicate balance. Curiosity and admiration warred with respect and restraint. Our age difference was obvious in the quiet way she carried herself, the patience in her gestures, and the ease with which she navigated her home. I, on the other hand, was younger, eager, sometimes clumsy in my attempts to read the room, and acutely aware of how inexperienced I felt in comparison. Then it happened, a simple, accidental brush of our hands as we both reached for the same cup. The brief contact sent a small jolt through me, and I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, a flicker of amusement, a spark that mirrored my own surprise. She didn't pull away. She merely allowed the moment to hang in the air, soft and charged. I felt warmth bloom in my chest, a quiet, steady thrum of tension that neither of us dared to name. Her laugh floated through the room, light and melodic, and it made me smile despite myself. I noticed the way her shoulders relaxed when she leaned against the counter, the subtle sway of her movements, and the easy grace with which she handled the mundane tasks of the kitchen. Every detail was amplified in my mind. The scent of her perfume, faintly floral but grounded with something warmer, the gentle cadence of her voice as she spoke to my friend in the other room. It was in these small, everyday moments that the age difference became clear, not through words, but through experience. Her world was rich with layers, stories she carried in her posture, her gestures, the soft sighs between tasks. And there I was, a younger man, quietly learning to navigate the gravity of her presence. This was where the tension began, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The first spark had ignited, and neither of us would speak of it outright, not yet. For now, it was enough to watch, to feel, to linger in the gentle pull of curiosity and admiration, as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the room. Evening had fallen, and the living room was bathed in a soft amber glow from the floor lamp in the corner. The sunlight that had streamed through the windows earlier was gone, replaced by shadows that stretched across the carpet and furniture. The house felt quieter now, as if holding its breath, giving space for the subtle tension between us to grow. I was perched on the edge of the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, though my attention kept drifting toward her. She moved with the same quiet confidence I had noticed earlier, now carrying a tray of teacups from the kitchen. The scent of chamomile mixed with her faint perfume, warm, comforting, and impossible to ignore. Every time she walked past me, the movement of her hair brushing against her shoulders made my pulse stutter just slightly. Then she set the tray down with a soft clink, her eyes meeting mine for a fraction longer than necessary. "Not on the couch," she said lightly, almost teasingly, though her tone carried the weight of gentle authority. It was casual, yet unmistakably a boundary. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips, but there was a firmness in her gaze that reminded me this wasn't idle conversation. I felt a rush of adrenaline, a mix of challenge and excitement. My brain knew I should just nod, respect the rule, But another part of me, the part that had been quietly observing her all afternoon, couldn't resist the playful defiance. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension hang in the air. "Then show me a better place," I said softly, my voice low enough to make it intimate, not confrontational. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, a flicker of surprise dancing across her features before she composed herself. There was a subtle shift in her posture. She crossed her arms lightly but didn't retreat. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me, and I could sense a mix of amusement, curiosity, and caution. Every movement felt magnified, the brush of her sleeve against her forearm, the soft exhale she didn't bother hiding, the faint shimmer of her jewelry catching the lamplight. I became acutely aware of the space between us. It wasn't just physical, it was charged, a delicate current that hummed with unspoken possibilities. My hands rested on my knees, small gestures mirrored in the tension of her shoulders. I felt a flutter in my chest, a combination of anticipation and respect, knowing that we were tiptoeing around something neither of us would name yet. It was in these small, deliberate interactions that the age difference became more apparent. She carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen life's complexities and knew her own boundaries. I, younger and less experienced, felt the thrill of navigating that space, the excitement of recognition without overstepping, the challenge of connecting without rushing. The moment stretched, warm and suspended, until she finally broke into a soft laugh, the kind that made the room feel lighter. "Fine," she said, with a hint of mischief and resignation. "If you insist, follow me." My heart skipped a beat, not from the words themselves, but from the promise held in the way she moved toward another room, the subtle sway of her hips, the gentle confidence in her step. And just like that, the first boundary had been acknowledged and playfully tested, setting the stage for everything that would follow, an intricate dance of curiosity, restraint, and the slow, inevitable pull of connection. We followed her into the kitchen, the warm lamplight from the living room spilling into the hallway and casting long shadows along the walls. The air smelled faintly of chamomile tea and vanilla from the candle she always kept on the counter. It was quiet, but heavy with anticipation, a tension that neither of us spoke aloud, but could feel threading through every glance, every movement. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, and regarded me with that familiar mix of amusement and caution. Her eyes, the color of dark honey in the dim light, seemed to measure me, as if weighing how far I might push the playful boundary. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, warm and deliberate, and it made my pulse quicken. I decided to lean into the moment, letting my own curiosity and admiration shine through. "Then show me a better place," I repeated, softer this time, letting the words linger between us like a shared secret. There was a flicker of surprise in her expression, but it quickly gave way to that small, knowing smile, the kind that made it impossible to look away. As we moved toward the hallway, our proximity tightened subtly. Her arm brushed mine ever so slightly when she adjusted her position near the counter. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried a warmth that lingered far longer than the touch itself. My hand itched to linger near hers, but I stayed mindful, letting the tension build naturally. Every step we took seemed synchronized, a silent rhythm that neither of us acknowledged but both felt. The playful challenge continued as she gestured toward the small sitting area by the window. "Here, I suppose," she said lightly, though her voice betrayed a faint edge of hesitation, a trace of vulnerability hidden behind her confidence. I moved closer, careful not to overstep, and felt the gentle heat of her presence envelop me. She perched gracefully on the edge of the armchair, the soft fabric brushing against her hands as she rested them in her lap. I felt an almost magnetic pull to sit beside her, to close the space just enough to feel the quiet electricity in the air. The room seemed to shrink around us, the rest of the world falling away. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the clock, and the faint scent of her perfume became amplified in my senses. Every subtle gesture, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, The tilt of her head as she regarded me carried meaning I could almost decipher, though we said nothing explicitly. In that suspended moment, I realized the true nature of our connection. It wasn't just curiosity or admiration. It was the thrill of testing boundaries together, the unspoken acknowledgement of something deeper simmering beneath the surface. Her confidence and my youthful eagerness danced in perfect counterpoint, creating a tension that was both delicate and exhilarating. Finally, she sighed softly, leaning back slightly, her arm brushing against mine once more. "You're persistent," she murmured, half amused, half resigned. I smiled, sensing the victory, not in words, but in the silent understanding we shared. The playful challenge had shifted the balance, drawing us closer in both proximity and emotional intimacy, laying the groundwork for the quiet, slow-burning tension that would define the rest of the evening. The night had deepened, and the world outside was cloaked in the soft, quiet darkness of early evening. The faint hum of distant traffic drifted through the open window, blending with the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze. Inside, the living room felt like a separate universe, a space suspended in time, warm and intimate, lit only by the soft glow of a table lamp. We settled near the window, the small sitting area feeling cozy and contained. She perched on the edge of the armchair, her posture relaxed but precise, the kind of poise that spoke of years spent navigating life's uncertainties with quiet grace. I found myself drawn not only to her physical presence, but to the weight of her experience, the subtle hints of vulnerability hidden behind her confident exterior. "You ever think about how life just takes these strange turns?" she asked softly, almost as if talking to herself. Her voice was gentle, tinged with a kind of wistfulness that made me lean in, both physically and emotionally. I nodded, silently encouraging her to continue. She paused, tracing the rim of her mug with her fingers, and I couldn't help but notice the way the lamplight caught the delicate lines of her hands, hands that had clearly worked, loved, and lived through years of quiet battles and victories. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing for myself," she admitted, her eyes meeting mine with a raw honesty that made my chest tighten. I shifted slightly, careful not to crowd her, but close enough to bridge the invisible distance that had always felt charged. "I think we all question that sometimes," I said, my voice low and sincere. "It's how we know we're alive, how we know we care." She looked at me, and for a moment, I felt the kind of understanding that doesn't need explanation, the silent acknowledgement of two people recognizing each other's unspoken truths. Our conversation flowed slowly, like a river meandering through familiar and hidden landscapes. She shared small fragments of her life, memories of triumphs and regrets alike, and I listened, absorbing each word. In turn, I offered pieces of my own perspective, the youthful curiosity tempered by honesty, revealing my admiration not just for her beauty, but for the depth of her character. At one point, her hand brushed against mine, accidental, yet deliberate enough to send a quiet jolt through me. The warmth of her skin against mine was grounding, almost sacred. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the moment linger, and I felt the tension between us shift from playful curiosity to something deeper, something rooted in trust and emotional intimacy. The evening stretched on, filled with pauses that said more than words could convey. The gentle rise and fall of her breath, the soft sound of her laughter at a shared memory, the quiet comfort of sitting side by side in companionable silence. In those moments, I realized that our connection wasn't just attraction. It was a merging of two perspectives, two lifetimes intersecting in a way that felt both tender and thrilling. As I watched her lean slightly into the chair, eyes thoughtful, I understood that the slow burn of our relationship wasn't about rushing toward physical closeness. It was about patience, attention, and the delicate art of noticing. Noticing the subtleties, the unspoken emotions, the warmth that lingered in every shared glance or touch. That night, we were no longer simply observer and admired. We were two people quietly discovering the gravity of a bond that neither of us had expected, but both were willing to explore. The house had grown quieter, the soft glow of the table lamp casting elongated shadows across the walls. Outside, the night was still, punctuated only by the occasional distant car or the rustle of leaves in the cool evening breeze. Inside, however, the air between us felt charged, heavy with anticipation, a delicate tension that neither of us dared to name aloud, yet both could feel with every subtle gesture. We had moved to the hallway near the study, a smaller, more intimate space where the ambient light barely touched the corners of the room. She leaned casually against the doorframe, arms folded loosely, but the slight tilt of her head and the way she watched me betrayed a flicker of curiosity, even amusement. I could sense the same magnetic pull I had felt all afternoon, that quiet, unspoken understanding that drew us toward each other while simultaneously reminding us of the boundaries we weren't ready to cross. I took a careful step closer, my hand brushing lightly against the edge of the doorframe, almost as if by accident. My pulse quickened at the closeness, the subtle warmth radiating from her. She adjusted her position, her hair brushing across her shoulder, and I felt a sharp, thrilling awareness of the space between us. Every movement was amplified, the quiet cadence of her breath, the gentle rustle of fabric as she shifted, the shimmer of her jewelry catching the soft light. "You're awfully persistent tonight," she murmured, her voice low, tinged with both exasperation and amusement. It wasn't a reprimand, not really, more an acknowledgement of the tension we were both dancing around. I smiled, feeling a rush of boldness, tempered by respect. "I think some boundaries are meant to be explored," I said softly, letting the words linger, careful not to push too far. Her eyes softened, a subtle vulnerability shining through the confident exterior I had admired from the beginning. For a brief moment, I thought she might step closer, closing the gap between us, but instead she shifted slightly back, teasing the space between us like a dance of restraint and desire. I noticed the faint warmth radiating from her, the brush of her sleeve against her wrist, and the almost imperceptible leaning toward me that betrayed her curiosity. We stood there, suspended in a delicate equilibrium, where desire and hesitation intertwined. The temptation was palpable. Every glance, every subtle movement seemed designed to draw us closer. Yet there was a shared understanding that rushing the moment could unravel the fragile intimacy we had been building. I felt the quickening of my heartbeat, the subtle tension in my shoulders, and the intoxicating awareness of her presence just beyond reach. Then, in a near whisper, she asked something personal, a question that revealed a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. It wasn't flirtation, it was honesty. And in that moment, the temptation shifted from physical closeness to emotional intimacy. I leaned in slightly, careful not to crowd her, letting the silence between us deepen, allowing the tension to swell and breathe. By the time she finally smiled softly, the unspoken agreement was clear. The night was far from over. The boundary had been tested, desire acknowledged, and hesitation maintained. It was the perfect storm for a slow-burning connection, one that promised closeness, yet demanded patience. In that quiet hallway, surrounded by shadows and soft light, we were suspended in a moment of exquisite tension, caught between what we wanted and what we were willing to wait for. The night had settled into that deep stillness that only comes in the hours before midnight, when the rest of the world seems to sleep and every sound, every movement feels amplified. The house was hushed, and in the living room, the lamplight cast a soft, golden pool across the armchair where she sat, its warmth wrapping around us like a quiet cocoon. I hesitated at first, standing near the doorway, my hand brushing lightly against the wood frame, unsure whether to step closer. She glanced up at me then, her eyes catching the light, not just beautiful, but steady, searching. There was a softness in her expression I hadn't seen before, a faint letting down of the guard she had held so carefully all evening. "Come here," she said, not commanding, not teasing, but gentle, almost weary, as though the weight of resisting the moment had finally grown too heavy. My chest tightened at the invitation, and I moved slowly, deliberately, as though every step needed to be measured. I lowered myself onto the edge of the chair beside her. The cushion dipped under our shared weight, bringing us closer than we had ever been before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, not uncomfortable, but charged, a silence that hummed with everything unspoken between us. Her hand rested on her lap, fingers curled lightly, and without thinking too much, I let my own hand slip close enough that the backs of our fingers brushed. The contact was feather-light, tentative, but it sent a rush of warmth through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, letting her fingers intertwine with mine in a quiet act of surrender. The simple pressure of her hand in mine felt far more intimate than anything else we could have done. Her skin was warm, her grip gentle but steady, and in that touch, I felt not only attraction but trust. I stole a glance at her profile, the graceful line of her jaw, the way her lips pressed together in thought, the rise and fall of her breath. And for a moment, I simply let myself exist there, holding her hand in the quiet glow of the lamp. She shifted slightly, leaning closer until her shoulder brushed against mine. The contact was subtle, almost casual, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. When her head tilted just enough to rest lightly against my shoulder, I felt the quiet rhythm of her breathing sync with mine, steady and grounding. No words were needed. The room was filled with a silence that wasn't empty but overflowing, with warmth, with tension, with relief. I could feel the gentle weight of her presence, her cheek brushing faintly against my shirt, and the warmth of her trust sinking into me. I lifted my free hand slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture was simple, but the way her eyes closed briefly, as if savoring the touch, made my heart pound in my chest. This wasn't about defiance anymore. It wasn't about rules or boundaries. It was about closeness, about choosing to be here, together, in a moment that felt fragile and infinite all at once. As the soft music from the stereo played low in the background, I realized we had reached a quiet turning point. Not rushed, not forced, just a tender connection, earned slowly, patiently. And in that closeness, in the brush of her cheek against my shoulder and the warmth of her hand in mine, I felt the truth of what we had been circling all night. The slow burn had finally found its flame. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, casting the living room in a tranquil glow. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the morning outside, birds beginning to chirp, leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Inside, everything felt suspended in a delicate stillness, as though the world had softened just for us. We sat together in the same armchair where the night had brought us so close. The warmth of her hand still lingered in mine, her fingers entwined with mine in a quiet gesture of trust and intimacy. I felt the comfort of her presence, the kind that goes beyond physical proximity, a steady, grounding warmth that reassured and enveloped me at the same time. She shifted slightly, leaning back into the chair, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. I could feel the subtle weight of her against me, the soft exhale of her breath, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. It wasn't overwhelming, it was grounding, the kind of closeness that didn't demand words, yet spoke volumes. I never thought mornings could feel like this, she murmured, her voice husky with a mixture of lingering sleep and lingering emotion. I smiled, letting my thumb brush gently across the back of her hand. Neither did I admitted, the words simple but honest. There was a pause, a shared understanding that this moment, quiet, unhurried, tender, was exactly what we had been building toward. We laughed softly over a memory from the previous evening, the sound warm and light, filling the space with a comfortable ease. Her eyes met mine, steady and soft, the flicker of amusement mingling with something deeper, a recognition that what had begun as playful curiosity had transformed into a genuine connection. The age difference, once a subtle tension in the background, now felt like part of the rhythm, a marker of her experience and my willingness to listen, learn, and cherish. I shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile intimacy of the moment, and rested my head lightly near hers. She leaned in just enough to brush her hair against my shoulder. It was a small gesture, yet the warmth and trust behind it were immense. I realized that this slow-burn connection wasn't about urgency or grand declarations. It was about the quiet, patient weaving of two hearts, slowly learning to occupy the same space without fear or pretense. Time passed gently, unremarked, until the first sounds of activity in the house signaled the morning's true arrival. Neither of us moved to break the closeness immediately. Instead, we lingered, savoring the comfort of being together. When she finally spoke again, it was soft, almost reluctant. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too," I replied, letting the words carry all the weight I felt. We lingered for a moment longer, hands still touching, sharing a silence that was neither awkward nor tentative, only warm, human, and full of the potential of everything still to come. As the sun rose higher, spilling light across the room, we finally stood, stretching and smiling at each other with that quiet, unspoken understanding. The slow-burn journey had reached a satisfying, tender conclusion. We weren't rushing anywhere, but we were together, emotionally and quietly intertwined, ready to explore what came next, slowly, thoughtfully, and with all the warmth that had grown between us. The story ended not with a dramatic gesture, but with the soft certainty of connection, the lingering glow of shared trust and affection, and the quiet satisfaction of hearts that had found each other when the world was still.